Hi, everyone! You're watching Heartwarming Tales, your destination for remarkable life tales.
Dr. Dylan Smith, a renowned cardiologist, was leaving the hospital after a long and tiring day. The surgery had been a success, but the physical and emotional exhaustion was evident on his face. With a deep sigh, he decided to take a walk with his stray dog, Roy, whom he had recently adopted. The tranquility of the afternoon seemed to be the perfect balm for his weary mind. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky with golden and orange hues. The cool breeze from the river gently caressed his face, and the sound of leaves rustling in the trees offered a comforting calm. Roy, a mixed-breed dog with intelligent eyes and scruffy fur, trotted happily beside him, sniffing every corner and bush. Suddenly, Roy began to bark excitedly, pulling on the leash and heading towards the riverbank. Intrigued, Dylan followed the dog, who stopped in front of a strange object half submerged in the reeds. As he got closer, Dylan realized it was a coffin, worn and covered in mud. "What the hell?" he murmured, feeling a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Roy wouldn't stop barking, as if he knew there was something important inside. Dylan, his heart racing, bent down and, with trembling hands, slowly lifted the lid of the coffin. Inside, curled up and covering his face with his hands, was a boy. He was emaciated, with pale skin and sunken eyes that reflected a deep terror. He looked to be about 7 or 8 years old. His clothes were dirty and torn, and his body trembled with fear. Dylan swallowed hard, trying to remain calm. "Hello, I'm Dylan," he said gently, trying not to frighten the boy further. "Don't worry, I'm here to help you." The boy slowly lowered his hands, revealing a face full of fear, but also of hope. "Are you going to take me to the bad men?" he asked, in a weak, almost inaudible voice. No, I'm here to help you," Dylan replied, extending a hand in peace. "Let's get out of here, okay?" Roy, sensing the tension, approached the boy, sniffing him curiously. The dog then sat quietly beside him, his comforting presence helping to calm the boy. "What's your name?" Dylan asked, helping the boy out of the coffin. "Alan," the boy replied, clinging to Dylan's hand as if it were his only salvation. "Well, Alan, let's get you to safety," said Dylan, feeling a surge of determination. As they walked back to town, Dylan couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened to this child to end up in such a desperate situation. As they headed towards Dylan's house, Alan began to relax a little, thanks to Dylan's reassuring words and Roy's friendly company. Dylan walked with Alan at his side, Roy trotting faithfully beside them. When they arrived at Dylan's house, the warm light from inside filtered through the windows. The door opened and John, Dylan's son, came running out, his face lit up with curiosity. "Dad, who is he?" John asked, looking at Alan with big, expectant eyes. "This is Alan," Dylan replied, leading the children inside. "He's going to stay with us for a while." The interior of Dylan's house was modest but cozy. The aroma of the stew he had left in the slow cooker filled the air, adding a feeling of home. Alan stood in the doorway, unsure if he should enter. "Come on, don't be afraid," Dylan said, extending a hand. "You're safe here." Alan finally stepped forward, still clinging to Dylan's hand. John watched him with fascination, and as the three of them sat down in the living room, the conversation slowly began to flow. "Do you like toys?" John asked, pulling out a box full of cars and action figures. Alan nodded timidly, and soon the two children were immersed in imaginative play, their laughter and chatter filling the room. Dylan leaned against the wall, watching the children. He felt a mixture of relief and concern. Relief because Alan seemed to be relaxing, and concern because he still didn't know how to handle the situation. "Dad, can Alan sleep in my room?" John suddenly asked, looking at his father with pleading eyes. Dylan smiled. Of course, son. But first, Alan needs a bath and some clean clothes. They prepared a hot bath for Alan, and while the boy bathed, Dylan rummaged through John's closet, finding pajamas that would fit him. As he emerged from the bathroom, Alan seemed calmer, though still somewhat withdrawn. Dinner's ready, Dylan announced, serving the stew at the table. They sat together, and although Alan ate in silence, his face showed gratitude. After dinner, John took Alan to his room, eagerly showing him his toys and books. This is my favorite car, John said, handing Alan a toy car. You can play with it all you want. Alan took the car, his eyes shining a little brighter. Thank you, he murmured, barely audible. While the children played, Dylan stayed in the living room, his mind racing with questions. Who was Alan, really? What had happened to him? Should he call the authorities now, or wait until he had more information? Finally, he decided to wait. First, he needed to gain Alan's trust and make sure he was safe. Tomorrow would be time enough for difficult decisions. Later, when the children were asleep, Dylan watched them for a moment. John, always generous and friendly, had already accepted Alan as a friend. Alan, although still wary, seemed to find comfort in John's company and in the safe home Dylan provided. Turning off the lights, Dylan went to his room, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He knew this was just the beginning of a long and complicated story, but he was determined to do everything possible to protect Alan and uncover the truth behind his situation. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon when Dylan got up, letting the faint dawn light illuminate the house softly. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the silence of the morning. As he prepared breakfast, his mind wouldn't stop churning over Alan's situation. He stared intently at the pan, watching the egg cook slowly, but in reality his mind was miles away, lost in a sea of thoughts. Alan, still sleepy, appeared in the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Good morning," he murmured shyly. "Good morning, Alan," Dylan replied with a warm smile. "Sit down. Breakfast will be ready in a moment." John was already at the table, leafing through an adventure book, oblivious to his father's concern. When everyone was seated, Dylan served the plates and joined them, trying to maintain a relaxed atmosphere. "Did you sleep well?" Dylan asked Alan, breaking the silence. Alan nodded, though his eyes still reflected a vestige of distrust and fear. "Yes, thank you." After a few minutes of silence, Alan began to speak, his voice trembling but determined. "My grandfather always said we had to be prepared for anything. One day, some men came to our house. I didn't know them, but my grandfather got very nervous. He told me to hide." Dylan looked at him, listening intently. "Do you remember what those men looked like?" Alan nodded, his gaze lost in painful memories. "Yes, they were wearing dark clothes and talking in low voices, but they seemed very angry. My grandfather argued with them, and then he told me we had to leave." "What happened next?" Dylan asked, trying to sound as calm as possible. "We hid in the woods for a few days. Grandpa told me we'd be safe there, but one night he didn't wake up." Alan lowered his head, his hands trembling slightly. John, sensing the tension, reached out and placed his hand over Alan's. "You're safe now," he said in a reassuring voice. Dylan observed the interaction between the children, his mind made up. "Alan, I want to help you find out what happened. I need to know more about your grandfather and those men. Tomorrow we'll go to your village and talk to the people who knew your grandfather." Alan looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Really? They won't take me back to those men. No, Alan, I promise no one will hurt you. We'll be in this together, Dylan said firmly. After breakfast, Dylan began planning the trip to the village. He reviewed a map of the region, plotting the route and noting key locations they needed to visit. John, always curious, watched his father with interest. "Dad, can I come with you?" Dylan smiled and nodded. "Of course, son. Your help will be important." Dylan's determination was palpable. He spent the rest of the day preparing, making sure he had everything they needed for the trip. As he packed, he thought about what they might discover in the village. What secrets did Alan's past hold? Who were those men, and why were they so interested in Alan's grandfather? Night fell quickly, and Dylan found himself once again watching the children as they slept. John and Alan, already inseparable friends, shared a connection that gave them strength. Dylan knew that the trip to the village would not be easy, but he was determined to protect Alan and unravel the mystery surrounding his life. "Roy, watch the house," Dylan said, petting the dog before heading to his room. Tomorrow would be a long and crucial day. As he turned off the light, a feeling of determination and hope washed over him. He was ready to face any challenge for Alan's well-being. The morning sun gently illuminated the rural landscape as Dylan drove towards Alan's village. The journey was long and winding, passing through green fields and rolling hills. Dylan took advantage of the tranquility of the road to reflect on his own past and the losses he'd faced. Roy slept in the back seat, occasionally lifting his head to look at the scenery. "Dad, what's Alan's village like?" asked John from the front seat, breaking the silence. "I don't know, son. I've never been there, but I imagine it's a quiet place like many rural towns," Dylan replied, keeping his eyes on the road. Alan, sitting silently next to John, observed the landscape with a mixture of nostalgia and nervousness. "It was quiet until those men arrived," he murmured, almost to himself. The car finally reached the village, a picturesque place with cobblestone streets and adobe houses. Dylan parked in front of a small shop and got out of the car. "Let's ask about Alan's grandfather," he said, taking the boy's hand. They were walking down the main street when they saw a woman struggling to fix a broken fence. Her expression showed a mixture of determination and frustration. Dylan approached, offering his help. "Hello, I'm Dylan. Do you need help with that?" he asked, pointing to the fence. The woman looked up, surprised but grateful. "Yes, please. I could use a hand. I'm Monica." Dylan and John helped Monica fix the fence while Alan stayed close by, watching with interest. "Thank you," Monica said, wiping her hands. "What brings you here?" "We're looking for information about Alan's grandfather," Dylan explained. "It seems he and Alan had some trouble before he passed away." Monica looked at Alan with a mixture of compassion and sadness. "Yes, I know. I knew his grandfather well. He was a good man." "Could we talk a little more about that?" asked Dylan, pointing to a nearby bench. Monica nodded and they sat down while the children played a few feet away. "I found Alan in the woods," Monica began, her voice trembling slightly. "He was just a baby, wrapped in blankets. His grandfather took care of him as if he were his own, although we never knew where he really came from." Dylan listened intently, noting the sincerity in Monica's words. "And what about those men? Alan mentioned there was trouble." Monica sighed deeply. "A few days before he passed away, some men came looking for something. They argued with him, threatened him. I was at home and heard the shouting. After that, he decided to hide in the woods with Alan." "Do you know why those men were so interested in him?" Dylan asked, frowning. I'm not sure, Monica replied, looking away, but something tells me it has to do with Alan's past. Maybe there's something we don't know. The conversation continued, with Monica sharing more details about the life of Alan's grandfather and the difficulties they faced. Dylan made a mental note of everything, determined to protect Alan and uncover the truth. Thank you for your help, Monica, Dylan said as he stood up. This is just the beginning. I need to make sure Alan is safe. Monica nodded, her face reflecting concern and hope. If you need anything else, I'll be here. Alan will always have a safe place with me. Evening fell over the small village. Shadows lengthened and the air began to cool. Dylan, Monica, and the children were in the backyard of Monica's house, enjoying a quiet chat. The relaxed atmosphere was abruptly interrupted when a swaying figure appeared in the doorway. Pedro, Monica's ex-husband, arrived with an obvious stagger and a half-empty bottle in his hand. His bloodshot eyes and alcohol-laden breath filled the air with palpable tension. "What are you doing here, Monica?" Pedro bellowed, his voice rough and full of anger. "And who is this guy?" he added, pointing to Dylan with disdain. Monica stepped back, fear evident on her face. Dylan, remaining calm, stood up and faced Pedro with a firm serenity. "Pedro, we don't want any trouble," Dylan said in a clear voice. "We're just here to talk to Monica." "Trouble? You don't know anything about trouble," Pedro growled, approaching menacingly. "Monica is my wife, and you have no business here." Dylan raised a hand, trying to defuse the situation. "Pedro, please calm down. Nobody wants to fight." But Pedro was in no condition to listen. With a roar of fury, he threw the bottle at Dylan, who dodged it narrowly. The bottle shattered against the ground, scattering glass everywhere. The situation escalated quickly. Pedro threw a punch, but Dylan, anticipating the move, dodged it and grabbed his arm, twisting him around and disarming him in one fluid motion. The children, frightened, backed away, while Monica watched with her heart in her throat. "That's enough, Pedro," Dylan said firmly, holding Pedro immobilized. "You can't keep doing this." "Let me go, damn you!" roared Pedro, struggling to free himself. But Dylan did not yield, maintaining his grip firmly, but without excessive violence. The villagers, attracted by the noise, began to gather around the yard. Whispers and disapproving glances were directed at Pedro, while admiration and respect for Dylan grew. "Pedro, you must go," said one of the neighbors, an older man with a stern face. "You've caused enough trouble." Pedro, realizing the general disapproval, finally stopped resisting. "This isn't over," he threatened, but Dylan released him and he staggered away, disappearing into the growing darkness. Dylan turned to Monica, who was visibly shaken. "Are you all right?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. Monica nodded slowly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Yes, thanks to you," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here." "Monica, this can't go on like this," Dylan said, his tone firm but kind. "It's too dangerous for you and Lucia. I want you to consider moving to the city with me and John. You'll be safer there." Monica looked at him, surprised by the offer. "Would you really do that for us?" she asked, her eyes welling up with tears of relief. "Yes, I would," Dylan replied without hesitation. "Not only for your safety, but because I believe you deserve a fresh start, away from Pedro." Monica took a moment to process the offer, then nodded resolutely. "Okay, I accept," she said, her voice firm. "We'll move in with you." The villagers, witnesses to the exchange, nodded their approval. Dylan had earned not only their respect, but also their admiration for his courage and compassion. That night, as they packed their belongings, Monica and Lucia felt relieved at the prospect of a new and safer life. Dylan, John, and Alan helped in any way they could, reinforcing the feeling of unity and hope. The drive back to the city was quiet, the starry sky accompanying them. Monica, looking ahead, felt more hopeful than ever. She knew there were still challenges ahead, but with Dylan by her side, she was ready to face them. Dylan, driving with a quiet determination, glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Monica and Lucia talking softly, their faces illuminated by a newfound hope. Roy slept peacefully in the back seat, oblivious to the change of destination. The city slowly awakened under a grey sky. The change of environment was palpable, and Monica observed with attentive eyes the bustling streets and tall buildings. "It's very different from the village," Monica commented, trying to hide her nervousness. "I know, but you'll get used to it. It takes time," Dylan replied with a reassuring smile. The following days were filled with adjustments and everyday challenges. Monica, accustomed to the quiet life of the countryside, faced the hustle and bustle of the city with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Dylan helped her every step of the way, explaining how things worked and making sure she felt comfortable. "Monica, this is the local market. You can find everything you need here," Dylan said one day, taking her to a crowded marketplace. "It's so big and crowded," Monica murmured, overwhelmed. "Yes, but it's just a matter of getting used to it. Come on, I'll show you the best stalls," said Dylan, patiently guiding her. At home, the family dynamic began to flourish. Monica and Dylan shared the kitchen, preparing meals together while the children played. "Pass me the salt, please," Dylan said, stirring a pot of soup. "Sure, here you go," Monica replied, feeling a growing familiarity in their interactions. "You know, I'm glad you're here," Dylan said, looking into her eyes. "Thank you, Dylan. You've given us a new opportunity," Monica replied with a sincere smile. The trust between them grew slowly, cemented by small gestures and shared moments. Lucia was integrating well with the other children, and the house was filled with laughter and lively conversations. One evening, while Dylan was reading a book in the living room, Monica joined him. "I was thinking," Monica began, "what about Alan? We need to know more about his past." "You're right," Dylan agreed. "I'm going to contact Mr. Rachel. He might be able to help us find out more." Mr. Rachel, a friend and colleague of Dylan's in the police force, was known for his ability to unearth information. The next day, Dylan called him, and they arranged a meeting. "Rachel, I need your help," Dylan said, once they were seated in Rachel's small office. "This boy, Alan, we don't know much about his past, and I think he's in danger." Rachel frowned, listening intently. "What information do you have so far?" "Just fragments. His grandfather found him in the woods and raised him as his own. But before he died, some men threatened them," Dylan explained, worry evident on his face. "All right, let me make some calls and see what I can find. Give me a few days," Rachel replied, taking notes. Dylan said goodbye, feeling a mix of hope and anxiety. Back home, he shared the conversation with Monica. "Rachel is investigating. Hopefully we'll have some answers soon." "God willing," Monica replied, squeezing Dylan's hand gently. The days passed, and a routine slowly settled in. Dylan continued with his work at the hospital, while Monica adapted to her new environment. The children, now an inseparable gang, filled the house with energy and life. One afternoon, while Dylan was at the hospital, he received a call from Rachel. "Dylan, I have something. We need to talk in person," Rachel said, his tone serious. Dylan felt a knot in his stomach. "I'll be there in half an hour," he replied, hanging up quickly. Dylan entered Rachel's office, anxiety evident on his face. Rachel was waiting for him, a thick file in his hand and a grave expression. "Dylan, what I have found is both surprising and urgent," Rachel began, opening the file and showing a picture of a young boy. "Alan is not who we think he is. His real name is Carlos Smith, son of Mayor Ross Smith, kidnapped years ago." Dylan was silent, processing the information. "The mayor's son? How is that possible?" he finally asked, his voice full of disbelief. "The records match, and the DNA confirms his identity," Rachel said firmly. "We have to act fast. We must reunite Alan with his real father." Dylan nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and worry. "Monica and I need to prepare Alan. This is going to change everything." Back home, Dylan found Monica and the children in the backyard playing. He walked over to her and gently took her arm. "Monica, we need to talk in private." Monica, noting the seriousness in his tone, nodded and followed him inside. "What's wrong, Dylan?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Rachel found out the truth about Alan. "He's the son of Mayor Ross Smith, kidnapped years ago," Dylan said, watching her reaction. Monica gasped, her eyes wide with astonishment and worry. "The mayor's son? My God, Dylan, what are we going to do? We have to arrange a meeting. Alan needs to know the truth and meet his real father," Dylan replied with determination. "But first, we have to prepare him for this news." Monica nodded, her gaze reflecting the same mix of emotions that Dylan felt. "Let's talk to him tonight, together." That night, after dinner, Dylan and Monica sat down with Alan in the living room. John and Lucia were in their rooms, giving them space for a private conversation. "Alan, we need to talk to you about something very important," Dylan began, his voice calm but serious. Alan looked at them, sensing the tension in the air. "What is it?" he asked nervously. "We've discovered something about your past," Dylan continued. "Your real name is Carlos Smith, and you're the son of Mayor Ross Smith. You were kidnapped when you were very young." Alan's eyes widened, filled with confusion and fear. "What does that mean? Am I going to have to leave?" "Don't worry, Alan," Monica said, taking his hand. "We're here to help you. We just want you to know the truth and to have the opportunity to meet your father." Alan was silent for a moment, processing the information. Then, in a trembling voice, he asked, "What about you? Will I still live here?" Dylan smiled, trying to reassure him. "You'll always be a part of our family. Nothing's going to change that. But we think it's important that you meet your father and understand your past." The next day, Dylan and Rachel arranged a meeting at the mayor's office. The room was elegantly decorated, but the atmosphere was tense and filled with anticipation. Mayor Smith, a middle-aged man with the bearing of someone who has been through many hardships, waited anxiously. When Dylan entered with Alan, the mayor stood up immediately, his eyes filled with hope and fear. "Carlos?" he asked, his voice breaking. Alan, unsure, looked at Dylan and then at the mayor. "Are you my dad?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Yes, son. I've been looking for you for years," the mayor replied, tears welling up in his eyes. "I thought I'd lost you forever." Alan took a step forward, his movements hesitant. "Why was I kidnapped?" he asked, his voice laden with confusion and pain. The mayor sighed, approaching slowly. "It was an attempt to hurt me. My work and my decisions put some people against me. I'm so sorry, son." Dylan and Rachel watched the scene, feeling the emotional weight of the moment. Alan finally approached his father, and the mayor embraced him tightly, tears streaming down his cheeks. That night, Back home, Alan seemed overwhelmed but also relieved. "I didn't know what to expect," he confessed to Monica and Dylan. "But I'm glad to know the truth." "We're here for you, Alan," Monica said, hugging him tenderly. "No matter what happens, you'll always be a part of this family." Dylan nodded, feeling a deep satisfaction and relief. "Yes, Alan, you'll always have a home with us." The night was quiet in the city, a calm that would soon be shattered. Dylan and Monica were in the kitchen talking quietly about the next steps for Alan. Suddenly, Dylan's phone rang, breaking the silence. "Hello?" Dylan answered, his voice worried as he recognized Rachel's number. "Dylan, it's urgent. Mayor Smith has been attacked. They're taking him to the hospital right now," Rachel said quickly, the urgency palpable in his tone. Dylan hung up and looked at Monica. "Ross has been attacked. I have to go to the hospital," he said, his voice firm but full of concern. "Go. We'll stay here with the children," Monica replied, her face reflecting the same worry. Dylan left quickly, arriving at the hospital just as the ambulance arrived. Chaos was evident, with doctors and nurses rushing to stabilize Mayor Smith. Dylan, moving quickly and precisely, joined the team. "We need emergency surgery," one of the doctors said, and Dylan nodded, taking charge. The operating room was filled with tension. Mayor Smith lay on the stretcher, seriously injured. Dylan, with steady hands and a focused mind, began the surgery. The team worked in silence, aware of the gravity of the situation. "We need more blood," a nurse said, and Dylan responded without looking up. "Use mine." The team moved quickly to perform the transfusion, and at that moment a nurse murmured, "Same blood type? What a coincidence." The surgery continued, and finally, after hours of meticulous work, Dylan stepped back. "We did it," he said, exhaling deeply. Dylan left the operating room and met Rachel in the hallway. "How is he?" Rachel asked. "He's going to make it, but he's weak. He needs rest and monitoring," Dylan replied, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Dylan, there's something I need to tell you," Rachel said, looking around to make sure they were alone. "The rare blood type. It's not a coincidence. I've been investigating, and you and Ross are brothers. You were separated when you were very young." Dylan felt a momentary dizziness. "What are you saying, Rachel?" "It's true. The records confirm it. You and Ross share more than just a blood type," Rachel said firmly. Dylan leaned against the wall, processing the information. "Brothers. All this time, and we didn't know." Later, when Ross woke up in the hospital room, Dylan was by his side. "Ross, there's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice thick with emotion. Ross, still weak, looked at him curiously. "What is it, Dylan?" "We discovered something during surgery. We have the same rare blood type. Rachel investigated, and it turns out we're brothers," Dylan said, his words heavy with meaning. Ross blinked, processing the revelation. "Brothers? I can't believe it. All this time," he murmured, tears welling up in his eyes. "I know. It's a lot to take in," Dylan replied, sitting down next to the bed. "But I'm here. We'll get through this together." The following days were filled with deep conversations and emotional revelations. Dylan and Ross began to piece together the fragments of their shared past, talking about their childhood and the paths that led them to be separated. "I always felt like something was missing," Ross confessed one day, as Dylan helped him walk down the hospital hallway. "Now I understand why." "Me too," Dylan replied, his voice full of sincerity. "But now we have a chance to make up for lost time." The bond between the brothers grew with each passing day. Barriers fell away, and a deep and sincere connection was forged. Monica and the children also joined in this process, supporting Dylan and Ross in their new reality. Alan, observing his biological father and Dylan, felt a renewed sense of hope. "We are a family," he said one day, his voice full of determination. "Yes, Alan," Dylan replied with a smile, "and we always will be, no matter what." The revelation of their kinship not only united Dylan and Ross, but also strengthened the entire family structure they had built. Together, they faced the future with a new perspective, knowing that despite the challenges, love and family would always prevail. Dylan and Mr. Rachel were seated in the inspector's office, surrounded by files and documents scattered across the table. Both men were deeply focused, reviewing every detail and connection in the investigation of the criminals who had attacked Mayor Ross Smith. "Dylan, we need to find a way to catch these men before they try anything else," said Rachel, his eyes fixed on a map covered in markings and notes. "I agree. We have to be meticulous and make sure that every step we take brings us closer to them," Dylan replied, his voice firm and determined. They spent hours reviewing every lead, every witness statement, and every piece of evidence. Finally, a crucial connection was revealed. "Here it is," Rachel said, pointing to a name on a document. "This man, Pedro, has been working with the corrupt council president to destabilize Ross's administration." Dylan nodded, feeling a mix of anger and determination. "Pedro, the same man who has been tormenting Monica. We have to act fast." That night, Dylan and Rachel organized an operation to capture Pedro and his accomplices. With a team of discreet and well-trained police officers, they headed to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city where Pedro was known to be hiding. The tension in the air was palpable as they approached. Dylan, his heart pounding, stood next to Rachel, ready to move in. "Ready?" Rachel asked, and Dylan nodded. They entered the warehouse with precise and coordinated movements. Pedro and his men, caught off guard, tried to resist, but they were quickly subdued. "This is for Monica, and for everyone you've hurt," Dylan said in a firm voice. Pedro, with a defiant look, said nothing as they took him away. Back in the city, the news of the arrests spread quickly. The community, which had been living in fear and corruption, began to breathe more easily. The influence of the corrupt council president also crumbled, and he was arrested alongside Pedro. With the threat eliminated, life began to rebuild itself. Monica, with the support of the community, opened a small veterinary clinic in the neighborhood. Her talent and dedication were soon noticed, and the neighbors welcomed her with open arms. One morning, while Monica was tending to an injured puppy, a group of neighbors approached her. "Monica, we want to thank you for everything you've done. This community is a better place thanks to you," said an older woman with a warm smile. "Thank you for your support. I couldn't have done it without this wonderful community," Monica replied, feeling a deep connection to her new home. Dylan, for his part, also saw a significant change in his professional life. His dedication and skill during the crisis had not gone unnoticed. One day, the hospital director called him into his office. "Dylan, we've seen your commitment and leadership. We want to offer you the position of Chief of Doctors," the director said, extending his hand. Dylan, surprised and honored, accepted humbly. "Thank you. It's an honor. I'll do my best to live up to this responsibility." The support from his colleagues was immediate and sincere. "You deserve it, Dylan. You've always been an example to all of us," said one of his colleagues. The community and the hospital flourished under the new changes. Dylan, Monica, and the children found a new balance, enjoying the peace and security they had longed for. The car moved slowly along the dirt road, kicking up a slight cloud of dust. In the back seat, the children laughed and chatted animatedly, filling the air with a contagious energy. Dylan and Monica, sitting in the front, exchanged knowing glances, enjoying the moment. They arrived at Grandpa Elliot's farmhouse, a rustic and cozy structure that emanated warmth and history. The family got out of the car and were greeted by the sound of leaves rustling in the wind and the singing of birds. "Come on, kids. There's a lot to do before the gathering," Dylan said, smiling at the excitement on the faces of John, Alan, and Lucia. They entered the house and began the preparations. Monica and Dylan took care of the kitchen while the children decorated the living room with garlands and flowers. The atmosphere was cheerful and festive, filled with laughter and lively conversations. "Grandpa Elliot would be proud to see us all together here," Dylan said as he chopped vegetables for the salad. "Yes, he always wanted this house to be filled with love and life," Monica replied, fondly remembering the man who had been a father figure to them all. The afternoon progressed, and the house was filled with family and friends, all gathered to celebrate the life and legacy of Grandpa Elliot. The table was laden with delicious dishes, and conversations flowed freely. In a quiet moment, Dylan took Monica's hand and led her out to the porch, where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with golden and pink hues. "Monica, there's something I want to tell you," Dylan began, his voice full of emotion. Monica looked at him, her eyes reflecting curiosity and affection. "What is it, Dylan?" Dylan knelt down, taking a small box out of his pocket. "Monica, ever since you came into my life, everything has changed for the better. We've faced challenges, and we've built a beautiful family. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Monica, with tears of happiness in her eyes, nodded vigorously. "Yes, Dylan. Yes, I will marry you." The children, who had been watching from the doorway, ran towards them, hugging them excitedly. "Congratulations, Dad! Congratulations, Mom!" they exclaimed, their voices filled with joy. The news of the proposal spread quickly among the guests, and the celebration became even more lively. The night continued with music, dancing, and laughter, each moment filled with love and camaraderie. Later, as the family sat around the fireplace, Alan looked at Dylan and Monica. "I never thought I'd have a family like this," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Neither did we, Alan," Dylan replied, smiling. "But now we're here, together, and that's all that matters." Monica nodded, hugging the children. "We're a family, and we always will be." The night wore on, and Grandpa Elliot's farmhouse was filled with a sense of peace and unity. Dylan looked around, feeling completely content. He knew that the future would bring new challenges, but he was also certain that together they could face them all. "A toast," Dylan said, raising his glass. "To family, to love, and to the bright future that awaits us." The glasses clinked softly, and everyone drank, feeling the promise of a future filled with hope and happiness. The new blended family embraced their destiny, knowing that no matter what, they would always be bound by the ties of love and trust. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us until the end of this emotional story. Through their challenges and struggles, our protagonist family found love, unity, and happiness. Everything that happens has a purpose, and even though we may face difficult times, it's important to keep faith and hope. Happiness and peace will come into our lives when we least expect them, as long as we act with kindness and generosity. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Turn on the notification bell to receive updates on our upcoming stories filled with life lessons and moving moments. See you next time, and God bless you.